Introduction. It's good to see such a nice turnout on a beautiful Friday. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me here. The title of this talk is listed in the program called Lake Preservation, the Ultimate People Business. As you look at the slide here, don't think of this as a religious presentation. It's not that. Think of the term soul as a synonym for person. There's a line in the movie, The American President, where the Michael Douglas character who's playing Andrew Shepard, the president, says that being president of this country is entirely about character. It's all right. Is that?
I think that's good.
Okay. All right. And one thing, I think the main thing that I learned from being in the Wisconsin Lake Leaders Program is that lake protection is entirely about people. So that's basically what I want to talk about today. And Pastor Bill is kind of a metaphor for the kind of dedication that it takes to really move the needle on lake stewardship where people are concerned. Okay, we're not advancing.
Just click on the blue screen.
Okay. All right, now it's working. So who's Pastor Bill? Pastor Bill is someone that I became acquainted with when I was living and working in the Lake Country area around Waukesha County in Wisconsin. Pastor Bill came to the Lake Country with the charge from the Lutheran Church of America to start a new congregation. And he had to start that new congregation from scratch. He had, when he arrived, no members, no parsonage, no building, just a pastor, a Bible, a plan, and a personality. And Pastor Bill was not a hellfire and brimstone preacher. He was just a very kind, pleasant, personable individual. He actually came and visited my wife and me at our house. We didn't join his church because we didn't really live close enough to it. We lived probably 30 miles away, but we're encouraged to talk to him, and so we did. But just think of how well did he succeed? We'll find out about that in a little bit. We'll also find out what has this story of Pastor Bill to do with our lakes and their protection. So for starters, what is the single greatest threat to our lakes? There are many that a person could name depending on their perspective or the lake that they happen to be on. UW Extension has done some research, and things that have come up are nutrient enrichment. We see off on the picture to the left, blue-green algae bloom, not at all pleasant. Excessive plant growth, whether that's invasive species or some native species that, as they can do, grow to nuisance proportions. Another one that would often get named is aquatic invasive species of various kinds, the plants, the zebra mussels, the spiny water fleas, and others. Herbicides and pesticides got brought up sometimes in this survey, which was done in 2020. What about this? I think this, to me, is my experience, is the biggest hot button issue around lakes right now is wake boating and the impact of enhanced wakes. There are studies of these impacts going on all over the country right now, and also many efforts locally and statewide in different states to bring some kind of regulation, some kind of order to the wake boating phenomenon, which is growing. I believe that there was a 12% increase from 2020 to 2021 in sales of wake boats. It's one of the fastest growing categories, and there's good evidence that these boats operate to somewhat bow up, and they have very powerful engines, and there's a pretty strong downward component to the propeller wash that stirs up the bottom of the lake sediment. I've seen figures as deep as 20 feet down. So is this the single greatest threat to our lakes? One could argue. What about this? We all, many of us, most of us probably who live on lakes have septic systems. My wife and I have one. How many of these septic systems are old and in need of repair or replacing? How many are defective? I've, in research for my newer book that's coming out in October, I encountered lake septic surveys that Sawyer County has done, the Sawyer County Sanitarian Office. And I compiled results from several of those surveys. And would anyone speak up loud? Would anyone hazard a guess how many of the septic systems were found to be either failed or inconclusive, possibly failed? Anyone want to shout out a number? 70? 20? 50? Okay. Well, you're a lot more pessimistic than the Sawyer County Sanitarian. The actual figure they came up with was 14%. I believe this was 7 or 8 different lakes that they reported results on. Now, there were some people who didn't let the sanitarian on their property, which kind of tells you maybe that system is a little suspect. But 14% of septic systems, that's still a pretty goodly number of septic systems that could be pouring phosphorus into the groundwater and ultimately into our lakes. So is that the greatest threat? What about this? One of the phenomena we see now is, and we see this on the lake where I am, Birch Lake in Oneida County, little family 2-bedroom seasonal cabins getting converted to large lake homes. And there's a lot more development of the property, a lot more impervious surface. And this can be a serious problem. So is this the greatest threat to our lakes? I would like, I kind of boil this down to what is the single greatest threat to our lakes? We are in an important respect loving our lakes to death just by the very fact that we're there. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong for us to be on the lakes. I'm not saying we should go back to when there was no development on the lakes. We can't do that. We wouldn't want to, but I think we have to admit that we all have our impacts on lakes just by virtue of being there. And that includes me, which we'll get to. Water quality really begins on land. The way we treat our properties has a great deal to do with what happens in the water. The more we develop our property carelessly, the more we expose the lake to runoff from the property, to nutrients from the land, or that we put on artificially as fertilizer. The more that we disturb the land with our lifestyles and the things that we build, the greater the impact that we have on our lakes. I think we all know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So what's the #1 stressor of our lakes? According to the US EPA National Lakes Assessment, the latest one that all the information is available for, I believe was 2012. They're done every 5 years, but the single #1 greatest stressor is the loss of natural shoreline habitat. Again, I think that's something I'm to get maybe to invoke Pastor Bill. I guess I'm preaching to the choir when I say these things, but an ounce of prevention. There's a Minnesota, Paul Radomski, a Minnesota DNR research scientist, worked with colleagues and developed a paper where they found that there's a 6 times greater return on investment from protecting lakes that are already high quality in a good natural condition versus trying to fix lakes that are impaired. It's really very difficult to take a lake that has, for example, a problem with excess phosphorus and algae blooms and exploding weed growth and trying to restore that to a more pleasant condition. It's a lot more expensive to do that than to take actions that take an already good quality lake and keep it that way. So we do some rather heinous things to our lakes sometimes. The pictures that I'm about to show are on my lake, which is 180-acre Birch Lake. And I have to say that we have about 10% of our shoreline that's Northern Highland American Legion forest, and so it's protected. And we also have a lot of people on Birch Lake who've done a really good job of leaving their shorelines alone, leaving them natural. But then we have people who do things like this, riprap on this shoreline. This property owner actually applied for a permit with the DNR to put in riprap and was denied, and went ahead and did it anyway. It's about 200 feet of rock riprap, where an area of the lake where there's really no serious reason for it. There's no serious erosion going on this property. Boathouses, when they're not done properly, I call this the horror. I mean, you can see the potential for runoff from this property over on the right side of the picture. Looks like there's some pretty serious erosion going on. Right now, under state law, boathouses, with very few exceptions, must be permitted. If I go to the county and ask to build a boathouse on my property, unless there's some specific reason, like an extra severe slope or some other unfavorable condition, the county's obligated to grant me a permit for that boathouse. They might be able to limit, they would be able to limit the size of it and set some restrictions. But if I want a boathouse, basically I can have it. This used to be a beautifully wooded property until it changed hands. And I like to say, first the chainsaw, then the furniture. A lot of us would like to see people, when they buy a property, live with it for a while instead of going to work on the trees right away. These people stripped a nice wooded property down to pretty much the bare bones. I've seen worse than this, but this obviously isn't great. Then we have, between a house and a very relatively small setback from the lake, a lot of hardscaping going on here. There's not really a lot of place for runoff from this house or from the rainfall to soak into the soil before it ends up in the lake. And then this is the classic lawn to the lake scenario. These folks mow all the way down to the very edge of the water, and we can see a downspout coming on there on the right side, which is washing. This lawn looks like it gets fertilized, so fertilizer is being washed into the lake. Probably not phosphorus fertilizer, because we don't really allow that anymore for lawns except in special cases. But nonetheless, this is the classic lawn to the lake scenario. Paul Radomski, that Minnesota research scientist I mentioned, likes to say that Kentucky bluegrass has done more harm to lakes than other invasive species have. It's an interesting thought. Okay, I did mention that a lot of the people on our lake have done a really good job of taking care of their shorelines. This is the shoreline where I live, and everybody, all the properties that you see here, the people have pretty much left the woods between the house and the water alone. Some have taken a limb here, a tree there, to open up a view of the water, but the shoreline looks very nice and natural. The pontoon boat that you see in the foreground is the one that we own. We made the choice when we bought our property to essentially cut nothing between the house and the lake. We took out one little struggling sapling tree to make a sitting area down by the lake, but other than that, we have basically cut nothing. We have what's called a filtered view of the water. We made the zoning rules we regarded that as the minimum standard. We tried to do more than that. We've tried to keep streams of water from running off our property, our garage, and so forth. But having said that, I'm not going to nominate us for any kind of lake stewardship sainthood, because as I mentioned, we all have impacts on the lake with our properties. I'm part of the problem. We have a house, a garage with an attached office, a screen porch, a deck, a stairway down to the lake, a pontoon boat, a pier. All these things have impacts. So all of us who live on the lakes, no matter how good stewards we're trying to be, we have impacts. So what do we do about this? I titled this slide, "Maybe there ought to be a law." I'm talking about local zoning laws now. I think we all know what happened to the ability of counties and other local units of government to protect their lakes through zoning. Most of that got erased by Act 55, which was passed, I forget the year, 2015 maybe. And now we have one set of minimum standards for lakes, so that a lake-rich lake like Sawyer County, like Oneida County where I live, have no more protection for lakes than, in the words of one county supervisor in Oneida County, counties that have 2 mud holes and a slough. There's something not quite right about this, but that's what we're dealing with right now. So zoning won't save our lakes. A comment that was made to me in research for my latest book, I believe this was the Sawyer County zoning administrator, said, we're complaint-driven enforcement. We don't have the time or manpower to cruise along the shorelines to look at violations. We're grossly understaffed. In the county where I live, Oneida, it recently came to light before the county board that there were 600 or so unaddressed complaints about lake zoning violations that the county staff had not gotten to. So not only has that county not been complaint driven, but they can't even handle the complaints. Now that that's come to light, it's being addressed. But I don't think anybody would argue that counties are staffed and effective at enforcing what little zoning protection we still have. So what does that mean to protecting our lakes? It basically means that it's up to us. It's a people business. We cannot require people to do the things that we might all like to see done. The only thing we have going for us is the power of persuasion, of cajoling, talking, educating. I don't want to use the word preaching, even though I've got Pastor Bill in the title of my talk, because preaching generally is a turnoff. People don't like it. I don't think scolding works. Scolding probably works a lot worse than preaching does. So what do we do? What do we do to move the needle on things that protect our lakes? So how engaged are property owners today in terms of protecting their lakes or knowing what they should do? Again, the UW Extension Lake Survey from 2020 showed that most respondents to the survey said they limit herbicides and pesticides. That's good. 1/3 showed some interest in rain barrels or rain gardens to help keep runoff out of the lake. 1/3 is not a real bad number. It's not the greatest, but it's something. 40% said they were willing to try native plants. This was among people in the north. Were willing to try native plantings. That's a pretty significant number of people who seem to have their hearts in the right place. But people saying these things and actually doing them is a whole other matter. What's holding people back from doing these kinds of things? One is not enough money, and there are state healthy lakes and rivers grants available in Wisconsin to do a lot of good things to protect our lakes. Some say not enough time. Others say not enough information. It's one thing to want to plant, for example, native plantings to create a shoreline buffer. It's another to actually know how to do it and to know where to go to get the native plants to plant or to get the advice that you might need on how to do it. I wouldn't know off the top of my head how to plant a shoreline buffer. I just kept the one we had. But so there's a dearth of information, and this is being addressed by entities like UW Extension Lakes and by lake associations, but there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. So where do people on lakes get their information about lake stewardship? And again, quoting from that UW Extension Lake survey, 17% said UW Extension, 40% said Wisconsin DNR, and 66%, 2/3, said their lake association. And to me, that is both an opportunity and a problem. And I say it's a problem because as I go around and talk to people who are in lake associations or lead lake associations, the number of people on the lake who actually are involved in the association who are members varies all over the map. On the lake where I live, Birch Lake, we don't have a lake association. We have what's called Friends of Birch Lake. It's kind of a social club, but there's a certain amount of lake activism involved in it. But I would have to venture to say we have 80 to 90% of the properties, property owners on Birch Lake are members of the Friends group. That, in my experience, is very high. Generally, I've seen as low as 30%. I've seen 50%, 70% being somewhat typical. And I sort of have to ask, why so low? And in part, I understand it, and in part, I don't. It certainly shouldn't be a cost barrier. If you have property on a lake, most likely you either have an expensive lake home or you have two homes, one on the lake and one somewhere else. And you certainly should be able to afford $25 or $50 or $30 lake association dues, whatever that is. But people do have their reasons. Oh, okay. People do have their reasons, and they generally don't come back to money. So what's the single best thing we can do for our lake? I think we would all say take proper care of our lakefront property. That's where the rubber really hits the road. And this sort of brings us back to Pastor Bill. Pastor Bill, as I mentioned, was asked to start a church from nothing. Today, that church thrives. It's called the Church of the Resurrection in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, which is about a half hour west of Milwaukee. So how did he do it? By going door to door to door to door, day after day, night after night, talking to people. And again, I mentioned he was not a fire-breathing preacher. He was just a very kind, personable man. And he just kept at it, built a network of people who helped him recruit new members, persistence, belief, never thought of failure as an option, never thought of failure as even a possibility. Interestingly enough, Pastor Bill left the ministry and went into sales. And I'll bet you that he's blown the roof off sales records for his company. So can we do this for our lakes? Can we be like Pastor Bill? As I say, not that we're preaching, but that we're making a concerted effort to reach the people on our lakes who might not be members of the association or might not have the information they need to do the right things with their properties. And yes, that's hard. I know this is hard because our friends group does not have any organized effort to reach out to new property owners. I've taken it on myself when a couple of new people bought property on the road where I live to reach out to them. And it was a very uncomfortable experience because I'm saying hello and I'm giving them some literature about good things to do with our lakes. And here I am, I have no authority of any kind, and I'm telling these people, here's some things you can or should do with your property. And that's an uncomfortable conversation to have. I probably should have gone about it differently. Maybe had them over for coffee first and not even talk about lake stuff. But it's hard. I mean, people are there at the lake to have fun. They're not necessarily there to get involved in local lake politics, and the politics in lake associations can get pretty thick. I know that it does in my friends group. Some people will say, I don't have time. I'm only here several weekends and maybe 1 week out of the year. And I've got work to do on my property and I want to spend time with my family. Some will say, I don't want more government. Some will see a lake association as another form of government, meetings they've got to go to, other people trying to exert control over what they do with their land. And then there's the hardline property rights attitude. It's my property. I can do whatever I want. And not only that, I will. So it's tough to run up against all that, but it's also necessary to try because we don't have any other alternative really right now. Can anyone envision the state legislature coming up with erasing Act 55 and going back to more local control over zoning? I can't. So local zoning won't do it. Local zoning doesn't have the teeth, doesn't even have the enforcement power to enforce what we have. Newsletters, printed materials, websites, brochures, good as far as they go, but they will not solve the problem. So how can we engage with lake property owners? One way is to talk about shared values. We all, I don't want to say we all, but most of us have certain things that we treasure about our lakes. We have our reasons for being there: peace and quiet, the viewing of wildlife, a chance to expose our children to the environment, fishing, canoeing, just enjoying nature, wildlife observation. Most of us have those things in common, even though some of us do like to engage in motorized sports as well, which maybe are in conflict at times with peace and quiet, but tell people what's in it for them. It's in our all our mutual interest to take care of the lake. I like to say that I live on 180.5 acres up in Oneida County. The 0.5 acres is the property I own, and the 180 is the size of Birch Lake. So why would I want to do something on my 0.5 acre that will affect the 180? And I think we can, if we can get people to think about in those ways about the lakes and how the value of the lake, both intrinsically and economically, depends on all of us taking good care of it. Another way is to offer some kind of reward or recognition for good behavior, which I'll get into in a little bit. As I said before, preaching turns people off, scolding turns people off worse, but praising people for doing things right and encouraging them to do so, that works a little bit better. So how do we engage with lake property owners? What we do on land affects the lake. What harms the lake harms your property value. Protecting the lake takes all of us. And then somehow coming down with a consistent message that we can crystallize so that it's automatically understood. The National Forest Service from time immemorial has done a wonderful job of this. There are other examples that I could cite, but you see Smokey Bear here. I don't have to tell you what Smokey wants you to do. I don't have to tell you what only you can do when it comes to protecting the forest. Now we can argue about whether we should suppress forest fires and all that. That's a separate discussion. I'm talking here about the message. You see Smokey the Bear and you know exactly what he means. So how might we do this for our lakes? Over in Minnesota, there's the Gull chain of lakes at Brainerd, Minnesota. A retired doctor, a woman named Dorothy Whitmer, got the bright idea to, well, brochures don't work, preaching doesn't work. Let's see if we could try some other way to kind of bring people into the fold who might not be. The Gull Lake chain is very urbanized. There are cities on it. There's a lot of lawn to the lake on the Gull Lake chain, but they're beautiful lakes. So what Dorothy and her friends did is they put out a solicitation and sent it to all their Lake Association members, which I think number about 1,800. And they kind of invited them to, hey, how'd you like to see if how good of a lake steward you are? And they put out 4 questions on this email. It was a Memorial Day weekend and people were at their cottages and it was raining. So people were on their computers. And all of a sudden, all these responses came pouring back. Yeah, I'm interested. I'd like to. So they offered up a property evaluation. and they got something like 60, 70 right off the bat. And they went and inspected the properties, and they wound up finding 40 some who qualified as lake stewards. And interestingly enough, Dorothy told me that one of those 46 was not her. She said that she took a more detailed lake stewardship score your shoreline test. And in her words, she found out that her performance on this evaluation was abysmal. And it got her into doing some things to her and her husband's property. But what they've done with this is, and now that the Minnesota Lakes and Rivers Association has picked this up, Minnesota Lakes and Streams Advocates, I think they call it, has picked this up as a statewide initiative. It's been adopted by, I think last I heard from their executive director, Jeff Forrester, about 30 lake associations that have adopted this. You get a site evaluation. If you pass, and it's very simple, it's 4 or 5 things that you have to do. It's not some list of 30 or 40 detailed tasks you have to take care of. If you qualify, you get one of these brightly colored Lake Steward signs that you can post on your pier. And what they found on the Gull Lake chain is that these signs cluster. And there's a reason for that. It's because you put a Lake Steward sign in front of a forested shoreline and people take notice. Somebody notices their neighbor's got a Lake Steward sign, they want one. So they get their property inspected, and maybe they do things to so that they can qualify. So this is very Pastor Bill-like, I guess. It's not preachy, it's not scoldy. It's here's some things that you can do for the benefit of all of us, and here's a little reward, a little pat on the back that you can get and display to your neighbors and everybody else around the lake. So what would be involved in being a lake steward, or what would be the equivalent of the Smokey Bear message of a lake steward sign? It might include some such things as capturing water runoff before it gets to the lake, keeping a natural shoreline buffer, minimizing herbicides, pesticides, making sure that your septic system is functioning and well maintained and inspected. And if people did those 4 things only, that would probably make a decently good impact on lake protection. And maybe there are some others that could be added to this list, but generally with things like Smokey Bear, the simpler the better. So if it was only those first 4, especially the keeping of a shoreline buffer and capturing water runoff, that's gonna make a difference if you get enough people doing them. So if Pastor Bill could do it, can we do it? Can we make, as lake associations, as leaders of associations, as lake residents, can we make a commitment to go out and actively reach out to people? 1 door, 1 pontoon, 1 fire pit, 1 pier, 1 screen porch at a time, if that's what it takes. Talk to a neighbor who isn't involved in the lake association, and why not? What would it take to get you to join this group? It can be a hard conversation to have, but if you don't even get to have the conversation if you don't engage. So can we be like Pastor Bill? Can we build a following of lake stewards? That's the idea that I'd like to leave with you this morning. And as one final thought, there's this common, often quoted words from the anthropologist Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if I may be permitted, just a moment of shameless commerce. I am the author of 2 books that I have. Lakeside Companion is available out in the lobby. The other is to be published in October by University of Wisconsin Press. Ripple Effects kind of elaborates on what I spoke about today, the different stresses facing our lakes and what we can do about them goes into quite a bit of detail. The Lakeside Companion is in every person's guide to lake life and lake science. With that, I would be glad to entertain any questions such as I'm able.
I am Virginia Betsy with the Oneida Lake District in Oneida County. And my question goes to, really interested in the Lake Steward sign. You said what's the single most important thing we can do is taking care of our land. But yet you have a book coming out, Ripple Effects. And I'm just wondering, thinking about wake surf boats and the impact from all these studies that one wake surf boat can have on a small, shallow lake. How would you incorporate the kinds of water recreation into that Lake Steward designation? Has it been done?
Okay, the question is to sum up, basically the best thing we can do for our lakes is take good care of our land. But what about the water sports such as wakeboarding and wake surfing and the impact of that? And has that been taken into account? And I guess I would have to say that taking care of the water in that sense is taking care of the land, but it's also somewhat of a separate issue. One of the concerns with wake boats is that the prop wash goes so deep that it stirs up the bottom sediment and can resuspend phosphorus and cause nutrient enrichment to the lake that otherwise wouldn't be there. This is sort of a separate thing from what you do on your land. Very difficult. In my experience, the only people who like wake boats are the people who have them, or that's fairly close to being true. And what's being done about it? The wake boat industry would tell you that it's really all about education, getting people to be courteous, to behave properly, to stay out in the middle of the lake so you're not creating huge wakes that damage the shorelines. There are also a lot of efforts being made to regulate these boats at the different levels. So have I answered your question?
I guess maybe just making a comment, I would see an opportunity, in addition to what you do with your land, maybe what you do with your boats as well, and being part of that designation. Maybe you have a silver and a gold, and the gold is you don't have a boat and a boat that has those kinds of impacts, whether it be on the shoreline or the lake bottom, or operating that way if you have one, so that you keep those enhanced rates to a minimum. Maybe adding to that, again, if it is just persuasion and the power of peer example that we have.
Yeah, okay, so that comment is, could the Lake Steward sign include behaviors on the water or the proper use of boats and other recreation on the water? And sure it could. That's probably a good thing.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us this morning. My name is Michael. I'm on Birch Island. You talked about your experience in your lake, not a lakes association, it's Friends of. And so my question is really for small fish, for smaller lakes who don't have as many residents or full-time residents. How do you engage more people? You talked about the percent of the people who join the lake association, why isn't it 100%? And when you buy a property, you get all kinds of stuff from realtors and insurance folks and all that stuff. So I know that's public record. In your view, do you think there's something that can be done when people buy lakeshore property that information comes from, and I'm just going to say DNR webinar as an example about education about the lake, that would help that?
Okay, so to sum up the question, for those who might not have heard it, is there, especially on a smaller lake, is there a way to get good information about lake stewardship in front of new property owners coming in? Have I summed up your question well? I think that is really the ideal time to get to someone who's moving onto a lake is when they first buy their property, because a lot of people are coming from the city and they have understandably a city ethic and don't necessarily think in terms of treating a property different that's on a lake than they would a property in the city. So yes, there are lake associations that have new property owner kits that they hand out as soon as they become aware. In Oneida and Vilas County, one thing that we've done a decent job of with our County Lakes Association is engage with realtors so that they have information about lake stewardship available to them. Realtors have a vested interest in keeping the lakes in a natural condition because that keeps the lakes more valuable and that helps them earn bigger commissions. That's not the only reason they do it. I mean, realtors are citizens like the rest of us, and they like to see the waters protected for their own enjoyment as well. And then in Vilas County, which is right north of Oneida County, they actually have what they call a new property owner initiative, where one of the things that they do is they try to get good information in front of people that they learn are moving onto their lakes. They actually offer up a free one-year membership in their association to any new property owner coming in who wants one. So yes, that's a really good thing to do. And there are a variety of ways to do it. Have I answered your question?
And to also address that, there is a presentation at 12:15 called Sharing Our Message Early, Reaching New Owners Before They Buy. And that's focused on, in Washburn County, what they're doing with new shoreline property owners. I know Iron County has shoreline owner folders that they give out to realtors. We're also starting that in Ashland County. And the biggest challenge is trying to encourage those realtors to remember to pass those out. But there are some initiatives around the state that are trying to reach out to some of those new property owners. We have a couple of questions from online. Thank you, Ted, also for summarizing our questions. So I have two. One is, where can a person get the Lake Steward funds? And who or where do you find experts to come out and inspect properties for willing land for owners?
Okay, the first question is, where can a person get a hold of Lake Steward signs? And if you would go to the Gulf Chain of Lakes Association website, you would find information about it there. I believe that you would also find information on the website of the Minnesota Lakes and Rivers Advocates. I don't know if those are available beyond the lakes where there are formal programs, but a person could ask. I'm going to ask you to repeat the second question because I forgot.
Sure, that's okay. I'd also add that we have a presentation on the Explore Your Shore Wisconsin tool that's come out, and I believe that they have customers to the site as well. So definitely see that presentation at 12:15. That'll be by panel actually. The second question was, who or where do you find experts to come out and inspect properties for willing shoreline owners?
All right, there are a couple of, well, the UW Extension Lakes is a good place to start, as well as the local UW Extension office or the Land and Water Conservation departments in your county. Those are excellent places to start. There are also a number of businesses that specialize in natural vegetation for lakes. Is Patrick Goggin in the audience? Patrick, can you, you'd be great to answer that.
Yeah, we can talk about that more. I have that contractor here at the 10:30 session. We can talk about that a little too.
Okay,
But certainly Extension Lakes can help you connect to that opportunity. And as you say, your local county land and water shops are great places to start to ask for technical support. You also can use the grant system to provide that kind of technical expertise to you.
all right, anybody else? All right, well, if not, I thank you for your attention. I hope you found it worthwhile and enjoy the rest of the conference.